And then they talk about they only recruit degree seeking. You know degree seeking, right? Graduate students. Why? Why I only recruit these? Because I have my reasons. So first reason, to reduce non-nationality related variables. Oh, they talk about two reasons. And also to reduce these non-nationality related variables among participants. Selected students were all studying in hard sciences. Okay, so they control their participants. First of all, they only recruit degree-seeking participants, and second of all, they only recruit students from hard sciences because they want to reduce other variables that are except for nationality, they want to reduce other differences, right? So they try to recruit students from the same discipline. So they talk about their reasons why they recruit this way. Okay. So you also need to talk about why you recruit this way. Okay. So for example, my students, she recruited students. She did a needs analysis from students in freshman and also sophomore, freshman and some in senior years. So she needs to justify why she recruits students from first year and the fourth year. You need to justify, right? So how did she justify? She justified because she wants to understand whether their needs will be different from those who just enter the university and those who are about to graduate, whether their needs will change. So that's why she specifically recruits students from first year and the final year. Okay, so then if you talk about this, then okay, a committee member will believe, yes, this makes sense, right? This makes sense. So they will not question your sampling strategy. They will not question your recruitment. Okay, so that's why. So when you talk about how you recruit, you cannot say, I just recruit it from because she's my friend. I can only recruit her. If this is not okay, you need to justify, you need to provide your reason. Okay, even though maybe in reality you recruit her really is because she's your friend, but in thesis proposal you need to provide some justification. Okay. Or if you want to use convenience sampling, remember we also have convenience sampling. You can talk about why you have to use convenience sampling. So you can say, because I teach in that school, so I need to use convenience sampling because that allows me to have direct access to my participants. Then that will make sense as well. But you cannot say, I use convenience sampling because he's my dad. Then this is not working. Okay. Okay, so this is move one. Questions so far?
If my participants have two groups, so in move one step one, I need to describe them first and then move one step two. I mean separate, do this 3 step or one by one.
Together. For example, you have two groups. You will say first group, second group, and then how you recruit them. You recruit them separately using different methods?
Like parents and kids.
Yeah, so then you can say, okay, first of all, you recruit parents first, usually, right? And then you use, basically that will be snowball sampling. You ask kids whether they want to participate or not.
But they do separate, I conduct separate, for example, separate questionnaire, separate program.
That is fine, but anyway, it is two groups participants, right? It's all your participants, right? Okay, so basically this is, sorry, move one, okay. So move one will be usually your 3.1, okay? if you have study design, then study design will be 3.1. But this is optional, okay? And then next, this is optional. And 3.2 will be move 1. So usually you will talk about your participants and research sites. Okay. So your participants and research sites, for example, in a university or at an elementary school, and depending on your study, sometimes you may want to talk about that school. So for example, if you are teaching, if your research is about CLIL, for example, then you need to talk about that school. For example, how many experiences does that school have CLIL experiences? And what is the average English level of the teachers there, of the students there, or the atmosphere about CLIL, etc. So then you need to talk about that, right? So depending on your topic, you would need to determine how detailed you need to describe your research site and your participants. Okay, so then we will move on to move 2. After you talk about your participants, then you need to talk about your data collection. So your data collection, again, if you have a new data instrument, then you need to talk about that, okay? In step 1, so this is optional, whether you have a new instrument or not. And step 2 will be your procedure of data collection, may it be pre-test, post-test, or survey, or interview, observation, etc. And then step 3, again, you need to justify. Okay, so step 1 is to talk about your experiment or your instrument. Okay, so basically this past passive will be more prevalent, okay, but we will talk about some exceptions. Okay. So for the present intervention, so this is an intervention that has been already designed. So it's a fusion of 2 established methods of language instruction, Or the measure used, the study contained 3 sections. So you will talk about your questionnaire, your pre-test, post-test, your instrument, okay? So usually we will use past tense, but sometimes we will use present tense. When you talk about the questionnaire itself, so for example, if you said the questionnaire contains 3 sections, or the survey has 7 questions. So why in this specific situation you will use present tense? Because it's a fact, right? The survey is always has 7 questions. The survey you designed has always 4 sections, right? So when you talk about these kind of things, for example, my tests, okay, my test has 2 sections, or my test has 40 questionnaire items. It's always true. So in this case, you will use present tense. But when you talk about, okay, how you choose, or how you design, then past tense. Okay? Okay, understand? Okay? Okay, so basically in step 1, basically if you have new instrument, you need to talk about it. So what will be the new instrument? So for example, you design your own questionnaire. you design your own interview, or you design your own pre-test, post-test. Then you need to talk about how you design and why you design in this way and what is the form of the design. Okay. So for example, I can say, oh, I adapted, not adopt, but I adapted, okay, a previous scholar's questionnaire. But because his questionnaire is too long, so I shortened, right, to make it maybe 10 questions. And then you need to talk about these 10 questions. When you talk about the 10 questions, that will be present tense. When you talk about how you chose and revised, past tense, right? And then you will talk about it and justify why you want to shorten it and whether you do some procedure to ensure its validity. Okay, so something like that. Okay, for step 2, after you already have your own questionnaire, interviews, etc., then you will provide the procedures, how you do it. Okay, how you do it. So for example, questionnaire were administered in classroom by who? By 3 trained research assistants. So they talk about where and by who. Or each interview lasted 3/4 of an hour to an hour and a half. So talk about how long, where, what kind of language of the interview, etc. Okay. Okay, so these are some examples from your papers. Okay, so for example, each task started with detailed information of the assignment. So they talk about what kind of task. Okay, so they, because the student need to carry out some task. And semi-structured interviews were conducted with da 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 da. Okay, so then they talk about the data collection procedures. Okay, and if you have, for example, sometimes you have more than one data collection methods, right? So just like I said, sometimes you may have pre-test, post-test, and interview. Then you need to provide some timelines. When will you do pre-test, post-test? When will you do interview? So just like I said, in study design, probably you will have this table about which question will be answered by which data. And in this section, sometimes your advisor will ask you to have another figure to show the timeline. Okay, so for example, just like something like this. Okay. So pre-test when? Okay. So if, for example, if you are doing pre-test, post-test for an elementary school, then you need to say, okay, in which week of the semester, maybe 3rd week of the semester, about when you will do the pre-test. And then whether post-test go first or whether interview go first. Okay, so probably post-test when, which week, and then interview when, which week. Okay. So you need to provide this kind of timeline to let committee members know exactly when you will do this and when you will do that. And then committee members will see, okay, if your pre-test, post-test only 2 weeks, then they will say, why? Why you do post-test just after 2 weeks from the pre-test? Isn't it too close, right? Or if you do post-test and then after 1 month you do interview, and then we'll ask why you do interview after 1 month, right? Okay, so when you provide this timeline, you will also justify your timeline. So for example, why you want to do interview after the post-test? Why don't you do interview before post-test. So there are something that you need to consider, a lot of details that you need to consider, okay? So usually in move to step 2, when you talk about this procedure, if you think, oh, if I only use text, I cannot explain very clearly, then usually your committee member would suggest you to have this kind of figure to help you explain, okay? Because usually for thesis, you may have more than one data collection methods, right? Okay. So that is move to step 2. Okay, and then move to step 3 is to justify, again, to justify your procedure, okay? So for example, within each task, the order of presentation was counterbalanced for both languages and passage, okay? So you know that, right? They do task, and the task have passage A and passage B, and have L1 and L2. So for some task, they may do passage 1 LA, and then passage B L2, and then they will counterbalance in the second task, so that their performance will not be influenced by language and by task. And also, to avoid these influences on informants, the texts were edited, omitting the name of the author and newspaper and the title of the article. So in order to avoid some influences, they try to make it anonymous, okay? So this is another way to demonstrate that you already consider all of the possibilities that may influence your research results. So you did some preventive measures, for example, doing some counterbalancing, doing some editing to avoid that any other variables may influence your study results. So even for qualitative research, you may need to also justify it. So for example, if your questionnaire is too long, or your interview is too long, or if your interview language is English, right? So you need to justify it. Okay, so these are some examples from your papers. So for example, the language I used was slightly different to avoid using exactly the same wording, which may remind participants of their choice in the pre-questionnaire. Okay, so because the pre-questionnaire and the post-questionnaire may be a little bit close, so in order to avoid that the participants remember their answers before they do the questionnaire before the lecture, so they used a slightly different wording, slightly different description. Okay, so they will forget what they choose before the lecture. Also, the construct validity of the knowledge test was confirmed by the instruction of the course, who is an expert of the domain multimedia systems. So in other words, they do a test, but they are not sure whether it is valid or not, right? So they ask the instructor, who is an expert, to help them examine the validity of the test, and it was confirmed. So this kind of justify can be done by, first of all, you explain your own justification. You explain your own reason, right? Or you can say it was confirmed by, for example, scholars, okay, or confirmed by an expert, okay. Or you can say I adopted some famous scholars' tests, or I adopted some famous scholar's model. If you are adopted someone's model, then it will be confirmed, right? Because it is a famous person's model, okay? So this is the validity, okay? And also remember that we talk about, in qualitative research, we talk about triangulation. Triangulation is also a justification, right? Why did you triangulate? Why? Because I justify my research methods, okay? So usually, if your 3.2 is your participants and your research sites, 3.3 will be your data collection. Okay? That will be your move 2. And then, if you have instrument, then you will talk about your instruments first. Instruments means the questionnaire, interview, etc. Okay, and then your procedure, right? Okay, so in this case, you will have a lot of subsections. So for example, maybe 3.1 will be interview, and 3.2 will be tests. And tests also include instruments and procedure. Interview also include instrument and procedure. Okay, so you will have a lot of subsections. So that is why we said for social sciences, we are using extended approach where we have a lot of subsections, right? And a lot of explanations, a lot of examples. So usually, if you design your own instrument, such as test or interview, the advisors or committee members would encourage you to put that in your appendix to make the committee members know that you are already, okay, you are ready, that you have your own questionnaire ready, you have your own pre-test, post-test ready. Okay, so and then they will look at the questionnaire and tests, etc., or interview questions. Okay, so usually when you write this, if you have your own, you need to design. If you need to design your own instruments, we will encourage you to put in appendix to ensure your validity and reliability, to increase your credibility, that you can go outside because you already have your own instrument ready. So when you go outside, you can use this instrument directly on your participants. Okay? Okay, questions so far? Okay, so if there's no question, we'll take a 10-minute break first, and then we will come back to finish move 3.